Hello and welcome into Big Ten Today. So glad to have you here alongside the Michigan legend, Jake Butt. I'm Kylan Mills. We are just about 2 weeks away from the kickoff to the college football season. This Big Ten season is going to be unlike any other, with 18 teams vying for the conference title. I'm ready for football season. I don't know if I'm ready for fall, Jake. Starbucks is supposed to debut their fall menu in just about a week.
That means the pumpkin spice lattes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, I played tight end. I like to consider myself a tough guy.
Yeah.
I love pumpkin spice lattes. I had my first one last year. All fall I was putting them down, but it is a little too early. It's still a little too hot out for that.
Yeah, it's warm out across the Midwest, but hey, no shame in enjoying a good PSL. Well, as we're ramping up to the football season, all of the preseason lists are coming out, and that's going to be today's big story. The Athletic released their college football preseason All-Americans. 13 Big Ten players were named to this prestigious list, and once again, that's today's big story. A total of 100 players were recognized, 50 first-team players, 50 second-team selections, 7 from the Big Ten made that first team, and this was selected by a panel of editors from The Athletic. Jake, you've been named an All-American yourself. For those of us who will never have a brush with that type of athletic greatness, can you put into perspective just how difficult it is to be named an All-American in college football?
Well, it's a great award. It is prestigious, and it's difficult really just because of the depth in college football. You know, you talk about how many teams, there is across the country, how many great players, and there's just only a few spots. But, looking at this list, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these guys, all these guys are capable of being All-Americans. But when you try to project which one's going to stick or not, it also depends, to that point, on the depth of those position groups across the conference.
Anything can change in any moment in sports. You've got injuries, you've got so many factors at play. When you look at that list of those players who are named to the Athletics All-American preseason team, who do you feel like are the no-doubt All-Americans in your mind?
Well, if I have a chance to recognize a tight end, I'm going to take that chance.
Okay, of course.
And it's even better when it's a tight end from my alma mater, Colston Loveland. But really,
yeah.
He's the first lock, can't miss. And, you think about it, he's a first-round pick. He's likely to win the Mackey, in my opinion. He will be a first-team All-American, but I think the other piece of this is the system. And understanding Michigan is replacing their top 2 wide receivers. They're replacing a ton of offensive linemen. They'll be introducing a new quarterback. I would be shocked if Colston Loveland, it would be a travesty if he doesn't get 70-plus targets on the season, 60-plus catches. I think he has a chance to about 750 yards to break the career receiving yards record at Michigan. This guy is just a complete tight end, and I think Michigan's going to need to lean on him if they want to have success. 6-7 targets a game, I think, has to happen. And just to continue real quick with the rest of the Michigan guys,
yeah,
they got some studs. Mason Graham is the best interior defensive lineman in college football. I think he's a top 15 pick. Will Johnson, the best cornerback in college football. I think he's also a top 15 pick. So at the top, Michigan has some of the best at their position that I think are certainly locks to be All-Americans.
Do you feel like the Wolverines are underrated a little bit this year? There's been so much talk about Ohio State, Oregon finishing at the top of the conference, but you just already pointed out the amount of talent on this Michigan roster. Despite, yes, you lose some key pieces like running back Blake Corum, you've got a new head coach. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like they could be, I don't want to say a sleeper because they're the reigning national champions, but do you feel like they could overperform expectations?
They could, but so much of this is going to depend, right? They haven't even announced who their starting quarterback will be. Mm-hmm. And, they're going to play Fresno State week 1, which historically that's a dangerous team. And they're going to be playing for their coach who just retired this offseason. We're going to learn a lot in that game, but we're especially going to learn a lot week 2 when they play Texas at that point, because we'll get to see who is the quarterback and how do they play against the elite teams. At that point, and we'll talk about this game later in the show. At that point, we're going to have a much better idea of, where Michigan's going. But I do want to point out, Ohio State is loaded with talent. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you could go across their whole defense effectively. There's a ton of guys on offense. I think Ibuka was named second-team All-American by this list. They have a ton of guys, but Caleb Downs at safety, I think, is a lock. I think he's the best at his position for a young guy, and maybe one of the most impactful transfer additions of the entire offseason. And Jim Knowles, the Buckeye defensive coordinator, he runs a 3-safety system. That position is absolutely key for the Buckeyes' defensive success, and they got one of the best guys in the country doing it in Caleb Downs. I think that guy's going to be all over the field making plays. To me, you can just go ahead and Sharpie him, and he's going to be a first-team All-American as well.
To your point about Ohio State's defensive depth, a name not on this list is cornerback Denzel Burke. who I could easily see being on that. Now, I know we're going to get into some of your picks who are not on this list here in just a moment, but Ohio State, to me, could have an entire slew of players who are named All-Americans.
And that's why there's such excitement in Columbus this year. You know, Urban Meyer has coached some great football teams. We know that, right? And then this offseason, he's, given an answer to the media saying this is the most talented team he had ever seen. I mean, think about some of the teams he's coached, at Florida, at Ohio State even. And he said, this is the most talented roster. That's all the buzz. So maybe the only thing that could hurt them is there's only one football. So when everyone's so talented, it could kind of hurt your production in a sense. But at the end of the day, I think all the Buckeyes, at least what I'm hearing, they don't care about individual awards. They're not interested in that. They want to win. They want to win at the highest level, and it's going to take their best players playing at the highest level.
It is a unique but a good challenge for a coach when you have so many mouths that have to be fed. But how do you keep all of those talented players engaged when you do have so many options?
Maybe that's where these past few years will benefit them. Because I know this from my experience at Michigan. My first 2 years, we went 7-6, 5-7. By the time our third and fourth year rolled around, guys were just tired of losing. You know what? I'll play a horrible game, and as long as we win, I'll feel better than playing a great game and a loss. And I think that's where Ohio State's at. They seem to have a chip on their shoulder, like there's something to prove. That entire defense could get all conference honors this year. And then, we'll talk about some of the guys not on this list here in a second. They have a ton of playmakers on offense with one of the best offensive minds calling plays in Chip Kelly. So this year has a chance to be full of fireworks for the Buckeyes.
Are there any other players from the Big Ten you feel like are no doubt All-Americans before we move on?
Yeah, I'm shocked that there's not a single Big Ten running back on this list. And Ohio State has two guys that could be on this list, in Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. We talk about Caleb Downs as an impact transfer. So is Judkins. I mean, seriously, he's in that conversation as one of the best running backs in all of college football. And Travion Henderson, he's just been plagued by injuries. When he's healthy, he's one of the best backs in college football. So either of those guys or both those guys could be on the list. And Chip Kelly has coordinated some great run schemes as well. They're going to be running the ball a lot more than people might expect. I also think Donovan Edwards and Kyle Monungai, who led the Big Ten in rushing last year, I keep saying he's one of the most underrated players. It would be understanding the identity of the Big Ten. I'd be absolutely shocked if there wasn't a running back on that list.
I do want to ask about a name that you did not mention as one of your locks to be an All-American, and that's Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel, coming in, transferring from Oklahoma. You look at the resume, you look at the numbers, he's one that maybe to the untrained eye you'd expect to be an All-American lock, ranked tied for fourth in the NCAA in career total touchdowns.
Yeah.
But you're not entirely sold. Why do you think that may not be a lock for Dillon Gabriel?
It has nothing to do with Dillon Gabriel. Everything you just said is factual. I look at Bo Nix coming from Auburn to Oregon and what that system meant for his career. I expect a similar jump for Dillon Gabriel. But again, to go back to your first question, the challenge of being an All-American in college football is there's over 100 teams. And there's other teams like Carson Beck from Georgia. That's a Heisman candidate. Quinn Ewers from Texas, that's a Heisman candidate. Even Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback for Colorado, that's a Heisman. So there's depth at that quarterback position, and it makes me a little bit more hesitant to say that he's for sure going to be an All-American when I know Colston Loveland is the best at his position. Caleb Downs is the best at his position. Mason Graham, Will Johnson, those guys are all clear in the lead at their positions.
One advantage that Gabriel does have is the fact that Oregon led the nation in passing last year, so you'd expect this to be a system where he'll have the opportunity to shine. But one follow-up I did want to ask you about on Gabriel is, will there be any transition period? This is a guy who's played in big games. He's shown that he can rise to the occasion, but it's still a new environment, new teammates. Like, what do you expect from him out of the gate in week one?
I expect him to be playing at an All-American level, just to continue with that theme. You say in real estate, you say location, location, location. And I think for quarterbacks, the same is true, and it has a lot to do with fit. And Bo Nix, coming from Auburn to Oregon, he increased his completion percentage by nearly 20%. That is a significant jump. It gives us clues that, being a veteran quarterback in this system, he'll have a ton of success. He's also got great wide receivers. One guy that could be on this list is wide receiver Tez Johnson. Filled up the stat sheet last year, broke the single-season reception record, and then he's got two great tackles as well. So when you're bringing in a new quarterback, you would love to surround him with talent and experience so he can go realize his full potential. That's what Dan Lanning has done. That's why Oregon is not just going to have a great year this year. They're a player in the conference title conversation and the national title conversation for many years to come. Dillon Gabriel will be a big piece of that equation this fall.
Check off all the boxes. Wide receiving core, good line. He should be set up for success, certainly, in this system. Are there any other players from around the Big Ten that you look at and say this could be a big breakout year, or this is someone who could maybe surprise some folks come the end of the season and be named an All-American?
Yeah, I look at Ohio State's entire defensive line. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, either of those guys could make it. Michigan, Kenneth Grant could make it. But then I go across the conference and I say, how about Dylan Thieneman? We could give some love to Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Purdue. He was a freshman All-American last year. He was third-team AP All-American already. And in that Ryan Walters defense, the position he plays is in position to make plays. And he proved last year as a true freshman, that guy's going to make a ton of plays. I read all offseason about how he is, he's coming out to practice 30 minutes early. He's staying an hour late. No one watches more film than him. So this guy's going into his sophomore year, coming off a explosive freshman year, and yet he's still hungry for more. It feels like a safe bet that Thieneman's going to be in that position, in that conversation at least, to be All-American.
Who are your sleepers? I want to know, who is someone that's not on the radar right now? And I'm going to make you rack your brain on this one, but who's someone who's maybe not on the radar that you're like, I've seen this player up close in person. This is someone I could see really excelling this year that maybe has gone a little bit unnoticed.
Kenneth Grant, the defensive lineman for Michigan, I think of all players in the conference, this is a guy that's going to rise up draft boards. We talk about Mason Graham, and certainly rightfully so, but I think a lot of people just stop there and say, wow, they got one great defensive lineman.
Yep.
Kenneth Grant is a freak of all freaks. I mean, this guy's like a double-wide refrigerator, but he runs down Penn State running backs. He's quick enough to win in the pass rush game, but he's strong and built enough to win against double teams. At the end of this season, I think we're going to look at Michigan as having the best interior defensive lineman duo in college football, similar to what Texas had last year. I think Michigan has a chance to have both those guys be first rounders in next year's draft.
Wow. And that was actually one follow-up I had for you is possible NFL picks coming out of this class from the Big Ten. But Mason Graham, Michigan defensive tackle, already has been named one of the best interior defenders, not just in the conference, but in the entire country. What's it going to take for those two to solidify their names on those draft boards?
I watched the tape. They already have. In the biggest moments last year, Mason Graham against Alabama in the Rose Bowl showing up and having key stops.
Huge stop in overtime.
And then you watch Washington, and those guys are just constantly in the backfield making plays, making opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. So I think it's just a matter now of having the volume of the season to get more of that national recognition, particularly for Grant, because Mason Graham already has it. And then just to keep it full circle, we're going back and forth with Ohio State, Michigan. I'm going to just throw a freshman out there, Jeremiah Smith. I got a football crush on this guy. I mean, he's 6'3", 220 pounds. He's built like an NFL wide receiver. Ryan Day's trying to say, hey, calm down a little bit, guys. Let's slow down. I can't slow down. I think he's going to have an amazing year. Ibuka's wide receiver one. He's a veteran guy.
Sure.
But don't be surprised when there's 5 or 6 weeks where Jeremiah Smith goes for 100-plus yards. He's a mature guy that is a professional already. I'm excited to watch him play as well.
So how do you define a football crush? Where do you draw the line? Is it just you really admire the play, the person? What?
When I watch him, I get warm and fuzzy. I get
you get butterflies.
I'm watching on my iPad, and my wife is like, "Why are you smiling so big?" And I'm like, "Come here, look at this guy." I don't have game tape, but I get to see the tape that Ohio State puts out, and that dude's making a highlight play all spring long. You just start to think, man, this is going to be a fun season to watch this guy do what he does.
I love that, though. Your wife doesn't have any reason to worry, hey, why are you smiling at the phone? Something weird might be going on. No, you're just watching football.
Look at this route.
Right?
Look at this route. Yeah.
All right, well, Jake, we'll check in with you here in just a bit. Right now, though, we step aside for a quick break here on Big Ten Today. Today's big stat shines a light on Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule and his ability to orchestrate a program turnaround. An impressive improvement in years 1 and 2 at Temple. Then how about his first year at Baylor? That was back in 2017. The Bears went 1-11, then 7-6 in year 2. Our Big Ten hosts and analysts have been racking up the miles, checking out training camps at schools all over the Big Ten, and they were out in Lincoln yesterday. Here's our own Dave Revson with Coach Rhule.
And pleased to have Coach Matt Rhule with me now. Matt, you've been part of some really good turnarounds, some year 2 improvements in the previous 2 programs that you've been at. What are the characteristics that you've seen in those teams that you're trying to get into this team?
I think the biggest thing is when the players start to understand that it's not Coach Rhule's way, it's not the coaching staff's way, it's our way. And when there's ownership from the players through the locker room, then they start to make those things happen. And I think when you see this team led by the seniors that we have, I think we're right on track. Those guys are doing exactly what I ask.
Describe the motivation level of this team.
Oh, I think it's high. I mean, when you have guys like Ty Robinson, Bryce Benhart, Isaac Gifford, many more who turned down a chance to go play in the NFL because they wanted to be part of the turnaround. They want to be the class that's remembered for, hey, you know what, we got this thing back on track. They don't take these days lightly. They're putting the work in to get where they want to get.
One thing that really stands out to me about the way you run camp is you have players live in dorms, you have the staff live in dorms as well. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, at the end of the day, we play for the University of Nebraska, and we play for the student body, and we play for campus. And so I think just kind of returning back, I think there's a brotherhood in football. Long after the records are over, long after the trophies are handed out, you'll remember the guys that you played with. You'll have memories. And so we go back in the dorms to get back on campus, spend some time together. You start walking down the hall, you see guys playing cards, you see guys eating together. It's just, sometimes the old school things are the good things.
Let's get into personnel a little bit. And it was clear you needed to improve offensively versus where you were a year ago. We'll get to Dylan in a second, but where have you seen the biggest jump outside of the quarterback position?
Well, I think the biggest jump overall really is the skill players, the receiver play. We had some guys last year that had to play. Jalen Lloyd, I mean, he started the year off thinking he's probably going to redshirt. Malachi Coleman thinking, hey, I'm probably going to redshirt. And by the end of the year, they were starting. And so you have those guys a year later knowing what to expect. You have the guys we brought in, whether it's Isaiah Nayor, Jamal Banks, whether it's Ja'Cory Barney and those guys coming in as freshmen recruited. I think we have firepower. And last year we were a run team. People could blitz us and say, hey, we dare you to throw it. Now with the people we have outside, they can go win the one-on-one battles. I think we can be way, way, way more balanced.
Let's talk about Dylan. There is so much hype around him and so much focus. We already know how invested people are in Nebraska football. And when you're a quarterback with that kind of accolades coming in here, there's going to be so much put on his shoulders. What have you said to him about dealing with all of that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, expectations are really sometimes what ruin people, what ruin teams. We just want to be a team. I want Dylan and all of our players to just get a little bit better every day. And I want them to have higher expectations for themselves than anyone else has. And so, to me, this is a game you love. I want them to play this game, and we're going to work now. But I want them to play this game the way they played it when they were 8, 9, 10. Not worried about what people are expecting of them, but just going out to play and compete. And I see a lot of that in Dylan. I see a guy that he plays the game with joy and with passion. And you know what? He's a freshman. You're going to have some freshman mistakes when you're playing, but by and large, he comes to work every day. We have a great quarterback room. We have a lot of competition in there, and all the guys are ready to go.
Defense, you made such huge strides a year ago, and you bring back a ton of experience there. What's the next level for that group?
I think it's not giving up the big plays we gave up last year. Understanding that when you are an accomplished defense, you're going to get things people haven't shown yet. You're going to get trick plays. You are going to get double moves, and us being able to react to those things, not just playing the plays that we're expecting, and taking the ball away. We were one of the worst teams in the country, if not the worst, in terms of turnover margin. And so a lot of people talk a lot about the offense, and that we should. But we only took the ball away 14 times. And so with the guys that we have, we should take the ball away. We should make plays on the ball. We should play with a sense of confidence. When the ball's in the air, it's ours. And so that is the next step. And I think the guys are kind of answering that call.
One of the things that's really struck me as we've come here over the last decade or so is the investment. It's an emotional investment of the fan base and everyone who loves Nebraska, but there's also a huge investment from the university. This facility is unbelievable that we're sitting in now. Had a great chance to walk around it with Troy Dannon earlier today, and it's just amazing. What does this mean? How has this streamlined your operation?
Well, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I came here. Knowing the fan base and knowing that there's not going to be a lack of resources, knowing that we have everything you need to be successful. What this building has done is, number one, it tells players that football's important here. It's not gaudy in the sense of like recruiting. It's adorned with things that help you play better, whether it's recovery, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, whether it's learning football, whether it's this walk-through room where you can get 1,000 reps. It's a place where people who want to be great at football can come in and be great at football. And so it gives us everything we want. And I think it's just a sign of the University of Nebraska has everything, if you want to be a great player, that you need.
The NCAA has changed rules this year that allow you to have more coaches on the field coaching, again, at a place with a lot of resources. How has that helped you?
Well, we didn't go out and hire a bunch of veteran coaches and, break the bank. What we did was we have a lot of great young coaches. And I've always respected the Bill Belichick's and coaches like that who have their coaching tree and they grow them from within. So we have a bunch of young coaches here that maybe they're serving as an analyst and maybe they're assisting with the linebackers. But what that does is hey, I'm third team. Am I ever going to be good? I have someone pouring into me. I have someone investing in me. Every player out there is getting coached, whether it's by the lead position coach, whether it's by the assistant position coach. I don't think there's anything wrong with coaching guys. So I'm so glad the NCAA changed that rule. We're able now to pour into young people's lives. And I think when you see why people don't transfer from here, it's because they feel like, hey, I'm being coached, I'm cared about, they want to see me be great. And a lot of that is our young coaches who do that.
Last question for you, Matt. How do you define success for Nebraska football this year?
Well, I'd say for us, we want to be relevant. When I was at the New York Giants, I never forget Jerry Reese telling me at the New York Giants, we expect every year to be in the running coming down the stretch, to go to the playoffs and eventually go to the Super Bowl. And so for us, we have to make a step from last year. It's been a long time since we got to a bowl game. But true success at the University of Nebraska, whether that's this year or next year, whatever it is, but we want to be relevant. We want to come down the stretch in November, heading into December, where we're in the mix for the Big Ten championship. We're in the mix to go play in the college football playoff. I mean, you're playing in one of the two hardest conferences in college football, and we're not going to make apologies for the fact that we think we belong. And so that's what we expect. And I'm banking on these guys this year that we can make a run at that.
Matt Rhule, fun to watch your team today. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.
Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule did an excellent job of building a foundation in year one of strong defense. The Huskers 5-7 a year ago. But the big issue they have to address is the turnovers. The Huskers had 31 turnovers, tied for the most in the country last year. And a large part of that was quarterback mistakes. Yeah. Nebraska goes out in the offseason. They bring in a 5-star QB in Dylan Rhule, but he's only a freshman leading this offense. What are the realistic expectations for Rhule early on in the season?
I think in just listening to Matt Rhule, and we showed the graphic of how he's turned around programs. What a great leader. An easy guy to believe in, and that's a big piece of this, is how is he communicating to his young quarterback? What is he doing to set him up for success? And I can go back to the fact that Rhule was an early enrollee, gets in campus in January. That is extremely valuable. You go ahead and learn the playbook, and then you go into spring knowing the playbook. And you know what? You're a young guy. Make a ton of mistakes. Make a ton of mistakes all spring. Play a great spring game, didn't make a ton of mistakes there, and then go through all summer and learn from that. So now you're starting camp here instead of here. You go through the first 2 weeks of camp, make a bunch more mistakes, learn from them. All of a sudden, you're up here. So he is a freshman, but he's not the same as a freshman that walked on campus a month and a half ago. He's already went through this growth process. And I go back to the spring game, too, to say, like, we use the word poise with quarterbacks. They never rushed. He never looked rushed out there. And I probably was cheering for this, as Nebraska fans were. Why are we cheering an incompletion? Because he threw the ball away a few times. And when we're talking about interceptions, that's right. Great. Don't put the ball in harm's way. You have a great defense. You have a veteran team. They've set him up for success. He's a young quarterback that's competing for a starting role. And you go to the spring game, he didn't look pressed to try to prove himself. He was perfectly comfortable throwing the ball away. That's a sign of maturity in a young guy, and a reason why I believe he's going to have a really successful season.
That's something that Coach Rhule said about Rhule, is that he is very mature. And I also like that he said he's not putting any extra expectations on him. It's just get a little bit better every single day. Now, he is joining a team that has 17 returning starters. Rhule is. There's a big benefit in that he has that experience around him. But on the same page, Rhule now has to win over a locker room of players who are a lot older than him. How does he have to come in and approach that and build those relationships?
That's not on him necessarily. I think that's on Matt Rhule. And the way this has been handled this offseason is perfect because we're all talking about, and Dave Revson's asking him about the expectations.
Yeah.
But we assume he's going to be the starter. We've assumed that since he walked on campus. But Rhule was hesitant. Like, he has said, hey, this is a quarterback competition. And he needs Rhule to win that competition because then there's a respect aspect amongst the locker room. But then, as is true for any young guy, this was what I was told when I was a rookie in the NFL, be seen, not heard. Do your job. It's okay to make mistakes. Learn from those mistakes. Be accountable to those around you. And from every report we're getting, that's exactly who Rhule is. It also helps his uncle as the offensive line coach. So I'm sure his uncle can help break the ice a little bit for him. And again, you look at the guy, there's a certain thing about the eye test, and you say, this guy has the makings to be a really special player.
It also doesn't hurt that Nebraska has been so effective in the run game, averaging 177 rushing yards per game, which was second in the Big Ten last season. So maybe taking a little bit of pressure off your young quarterback that you can also put the ball on the ground and run the football. We'll step aside here for another quick break. A chilly affair is coming to the friendly Confines. The Big Ten Conference and Chicago Cubs announced today the Frozen Confines Big Ten Hockey Series will be played at Wrigley Field. 4 games will take place in January of 2025 in a first-of-its-kind event. Here's Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti on the new series.
It'll be, 4 games. We'll have 2 games on Friday, January 3rd, with Notre Dame and Penn State, Michigan and Ohio State. On Saturday, we'll have the Wisconsin women and the Ohio State women, a rematch of the last 2 championship games in women's college hockey, followed by Wisconsin and Michigan State. So it's just absolutely strength of our league. It shows the depth. I think our fans are going to be super excited about the opportunity to do this. And I will say what's most important about this from the perspective of the Big Ten is that we want to continue to bring unique and memorable experiences to our student athletes. That's what this is about, being able to give them experiences. Last year, you saw in the Big Ten, we had 92,000 people in an outdoor volleyball game in Nebraska. We had 55,000 people watch Caitlin Clark and the Iowa women's basketball team, and setting records in both cases. So the fact that we're doing this is just another example of that. And we're committed to continuing to do that, and it's really important. To bring the women's game here is just a big part of this event for us, to have that opportunity to spread that, even though we don't, it's not Big Ten women's hockey, but they are Big Ten members. So we're really pleased about the opportunity to do that.
Here's another look at the Frozen Confines Big Ten Hockey Series matchups. It starts with a doubleheader on January 3rd, 2025. Penn State men's hockey will face off against Notre Dame, and Wisconsin men's hockey takes on Michigan State. Then on January 4th, Ohio State women's hockey faces Wisconsin, and the Badgers deal with Michigan State. All of those games will air right here on the Big Ten Network. Rick Pizzo talked with Blackhawks legend Chris Chelios about the impact of this series.
Well, Chris, with all your ties to not just the city of Chicago in hockey, but also the Big Ten, for you, for your family, how cool is it to be part of this and look forward to college hockey coming here outside at Wrigley Field? Yeah, what a stage for all these athletes and fans. And like I mentioned earlier, everybody comes from all over the country and the world to see Wrigley Field. And then for hockey and the Big Ten Network to carry this, it's going to be an unbelievable event. Yeah, you get goosebumps looking at all these Big Ten jerseys, Michigan State, Wisconsin. So it's great for college hockey. It's great for college hockey kids, and it's going to be an unbelievable week. I think one of the great parts as well, we've seen men's college hockey outside. Now we get to see women's as well. I know you have 2 daughters who are athletes themselves. How special to be able to feature and focus women's hockey, especially with 2 phenomenal programs like Ohio State and the one at your alma mater, Wisconsin. Right, and in Wisconsin, what they've done over the past few years at Wisconsin, the women's team, and they rival Ohio State and Minnesota back-to-back, and the success they've had, all schools, and all for women's hockey, and what the women's Olympic team's done over the years, upsetting Canada. And but I'm proud of them. I mean, most of the girls, my sisters, never had that opportunity, and now they're front and center with the guys, and it's going to be incredible for them, too, and I'm sure they're very honored and humbled by it, too. College hockey overall has seen such a boost, I would say, in the last 10, 15 years. Probably when you came out, almost all the guys that were drafted played in Quebec majors first. They were junior players or international players. What do you think about the boost and the level of play that we've seen in college hockey, and the NHL taking advantage by drafting so many more college guys in higher rounds?
Yeah, I've always said this. I go right back to 1980 with that Olympic team, what they did for U.S. hockey players, and then we were 1984, we were mostly college players then too. And then, instead of looking at those junior leagues, they'd rather get kids out of college more matured, more developed, lower risk. So all you kids out there, don't be in a hurry to get to the show. Do those 4 years of college, it'll be the best time of your life.
Finally, you still look like you're in amazing shape. I mean, you were known for playing, 35, 40 minutes a game. Yeah. Some nights, you still get the desire to lace them up sometimes and go out there and play?
I'm that guy now that looks stiff and awkward, and I'm 62, I'm playing against 40-year-olds, and that does not work. So I'm on the sidelines now. Every once in a while, I'll throw them out there if I get someone my age. But, their upcoming game coming between the Blues and the Blackhawks is going to be here. And if they have an alumni game, you could bet I'll be in that one.
Chris, we truly appreciate the time. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Kylan?
All right, thank you, Rick. Before we move on back to some football talk, Jake, it is story time here on Big Ten Today. You mentioned to me before we came on the air that you know Chris Chelios in kind of a unique way. Can you explain how you met?
Well, I'll just piggyback off. Rick said, man, you look great. He does look great.
He does look great.
We go to the same sauna and cold tub house together. So that's the fountain of youth. It's the hottest sauna in the city and the coldest cold tub.
Really?
And that's how I kind of met him. And I was like, wow, I'm sweating with a legend.
You said that you didn't really know initially. You're in the sauna, you're just kind of sitting there casually talking, and you look over, you're like, oh, is that a Blackhawks legend and 3-time Stanley Cup winner?
Yes.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
I would be sweating a little nervous.
Yeah, the kids say aura these days. That dude's got some aura, I mean, he's a legend, right?
Yeah, and so is the sauna also your secret to youth and looking good?
I'm
your big tip
I'm
for
just
people at
only
home?
29, so I can't say quite yet. I don't want to jump the gun and jinx myself. So I'm youthful just because I'm youthful. I'm 29
All
years
right,
old.
fair.
Yeah.
Appreciate the self-awareness. It's all downhill after 30, so don't worry, you'll
Noted.
get there.
Okay, all right.
Well, ice hockey at the friendly confines is going to be must-watch TV. Once again, those 4 matchups airing right here on the Big Ten Network. And all season long, there is going to be must-watch football airing here on the Big Ten Network, airing on Fox. And now we want to take a look at a couple of Big Ten matchups or games Big Ten teams are playing that you think are going to be must-see TV. What are they?
Okay, there's the obvious ones, Ohio State, Michigan.
Right.
I mean, you got to say Oregon versus Ohio State is a season-defining game. Oregon versus Michigan, there's some game. I will start with one that is a little bit obvious, which is Michigan, Texas, but for a very specific reason. Michigan is a team that there's a fork in the road. They could be really special this year, or maybe it's a little bit of I don't think they'll be bad, but it may be a rebuilding year. What happens that game when we get to see whoever the quarterback is play against an elite team? If it looks uncertain, okay, that'll set our expectations. But what happens if Michigan is able to efficiently pass the ball down the field and combine that with a revamped running game with a defense that I believe will be one of the best in the country? That's a season-defining game. So it's also interesting, both programs, big brands, struggled for a while, now back on top. So that's number one. Number two, Colorado, Nebraska. Again, two programs kind of looking each other eye to eye where the expectations are high. There will be a winner and a loser in that game. There's going to be a mental challenge to the loser. That's an early season game. Colorado's been calling themselves, they're everyone's Super Bowl. What happens if you lose that game? Nebraska, you're carrying the weight of the past half decade on your shoulders at this point. What happens if you lose that game? So that's another season defining game for both teams. And I'll wrap it up with this fun rivalry that we now get to include in the Big Ten umbrella, USC, UCLA. We have some great rivalries in our conference. Now we add that great crosstown rivalry. It's going to be fun to watch.
A battle for Southern California, and USC and UCLA are two teams I think have very interesting storylines going into the season. Some pressure on USC head coach Lincoln Riley to figure out what's going on with that defense and get them back to where expectations are at. And then for UCLA, you've got a first-year head coach in Deshaun Foster. Just curious, what are your expectations for those two programs?
Well, I expect USC to be significantly improved. Just the things I know with Lincoln Riley calling plays. Miller Moss is going to be an elite quarterback. The offense is going to put up 30 points a game. That defense was horrendous last year. Out of position, tackling, everything fundamental, not great. But they go and get UCLA's defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn. That they are going to be improved on that side of the ball. The schedule's a gauntlet. So yes, they'll be better, but it's all relative to the rest of the schedule. And I think for UCLA, for Coach Foster, it was a scramble. This was a late hire. He builds his staff really late. He was able to keep some key pieces from transferring out, notably Garbers, their quarterback. It's still just, this is going to take some time, but I believe in him as a leader, and I'm excited to see. That's a game later in the season. Both teams will have a chance to establish themselves and lead into what will be a really fun rivalry game.
Well, that'll be a very fun rivalry game, and all three of your games you just mentioned, by the way, are coming up in September, so you mentioned it maybe takes some time to figure things out. Not a lot of time before you've got big, key, marquee matchups coming up here amongst Big Ten schools. Lock in, folks. The college football season is right around the corner. Here's a look at some of the early Week 1 matchups. August 29th, Howard at Rutgers, North Carolina at Minnesota, Eastern Illinois at Illinois. I'll be on the call for that one, so mark your calendars. August 30th, Florida Atlantic at Michigan State, and Western Michigan at Wisconsin. By the way, a new era is underway out in East Lansing, so let's hear from first-year head coach Jonathan Smith on training camp.
I thought where we'd be. I thought we were a work in progress. I think each day you make some strides, and then you have a setback in a day or two when more install comes and maybe some more flaws you're trying to learn about, individual players or schemes and sides of the ball. So look, I feel good of where we're at and really the progress we're making. Because you're getting closer, there's things to get fixed. We talked about this week kind of being a week of separation. I think the good teams are not going to just go through the motions and get through camp. We're constantly improving, and we got to push this. The middle of camp, like I say, bodies to our, even on the mental side, we got to keep pushing on it. And then let's face it, separation in regards to depth chart. Guys are trying to earn spots, earn playing time, earn getting on the bus for travel squad. So it's a huge week.
A lot of excitement building in East Lansing as head coach Jonathan Smith is ready to get underway in his first season with a program that's in a rebuild. It's hard to figure out, where do you start? A lot of changes, not just in the coaching staff, but in player turnover. 36 players going out, 24 coming in via the transfer portal. What is the most pressing issue this Michigan State team has to address?
Okay, so I look at the word pressing and I look at the word urgent. There's a quote by John Wooden talking about how he wants his teams to be urgent but never rushed. And I think that applies to Michigan State here, where because of all that newness, it's going to take some time. And I listen to Jonathan Smith talk and I say that guy is the right man for the job. He's going to get them back to their standard, but there's no need to be rushed. The most urgent matter at this point is, you go through spring and you have a ton of film and you have a ton of data. You go through summer conditioning, your strength coaches say, hey, here's the guys that are strong, here's the guys that are fast, here's the guys that are improving. You're now halfway through camp, you have more data. Well, with all this newness, it's on Coach Smith and the rest of his staff to go through that data and say, this is our identity of the team going forward. These past few years for Michigan State, they've lost their identity. He has now a ton of data that he can go and meet with his staff on and say, this gives us the best chance for us to win. And you're playing a game against Florida Atlantic, very, very winnable game for Michigan State. Go in that game and establish who you want the Spartans to be now in Week 1 of the Jonathan Smith era.
One thing that can be a delicate balance for first-year head coaches is how much do you implement your system that you believe in. For example, Smith known to maybe have a similar style of offense to the San Francisco 49ers, for example. How much do you cater it to the players that you have available? And you may not have a roster that you entirely built the way you want it. Yeah. What's that balance have to be?
It's a good question, and it's completely dependent on your roster and the health of your team as well. When you're going through a drastic change, he will get to his system, but does he feel, Michigan State at times ran 10 personnel and 11 personnel last year. He's known to use multiple tight ends. I think that's the right identity for Michigan State, just understanding the type of recruits they're going to get there in the Midwest, bigger bodies. I was 1-3 against Michigan State in my career. They won with a physical run game and a physical defense. That's going to be, for Jonathan Smith, is it's going to take some time based on how quickly he can develop and recruit guys' body type to get to that type of system.
Well, Michigan State kicks off the season hosting Florida Atlantic. That game coming up on Friday, August 30th, right here on the Big Ten Network. Moving on to another team that maybe will finish middle of the pack. It'll be interesting to see exactly where they fall is Wisconsin, coming up in year 2 under head coach Luke Fickell. Finished 7-6 last season, lost to LSU in the ReliaQuest Bowl. The air raid offense,
Yep.
there's high expectations. What do you feel like is the most pressing issue that this Wisconsin team has to figure out?
Well, the first one was who's going to be named quarterback. And offensive coordinator Phil Longo said it is Van Dyke. As of yesterday, Van Dyke's going to be their quarterback this year, which was a bit expected. But you look at Wisconsin, that's going to be one of the better defenses in the conference and in the country once again. But you talk about the air raid system, and I go back to their offensive philosophy last year. Brand new system. But everything, when I look at the film, everything happened within 10 to 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. They weren't able to stretch defenses and challenge them vertically. That condenses the field. You want a nice big open field in the air raid system. So Van Dyke and some of his bigger receivers, whether that's CJ Williams or Bryson Green, big, tall, strong guys, they got to get downfield. They got to stretch the defense. Then all of a sudden it's going to open up the run game and the underneath passing for Will Pauling.
Another big factor for Wisconsin this season has got to be their schedule. It looks like a gauntlet on paper.
Loaded.
They've got Alabama in September, Big Ten powerhouses in Penn State, Oregon, USC, Iowa. How big of a challenge is that going to be for this group to overcome as they try to figure out that offense and find a rhythm?
It's a huge challenge. This is the new era of the Big Ten. You know, this is where coaching is going to be at a premium because all of a sudden you have to factor in roster management and health and practice habits. So this is one of the more challenging schedules in college football. But, you know, Luke Fickell's a phenomenal coach. He's been to a playoff. He's put guys in the NFL. So he's the right guy for a job.
How about Wisconsin? Once again, they kick off the season hosting Western Michigan. Now moving along, though, to Minnesota. A bit of a step back last year for head coach P.J. Fleck's squad. 6-7 is how they finished. A little bit of a slide defensively, which had been their strong suit prior.
Yep.
What is the most urgent issue for this Minnesota team?
With P.J. Fleck, whenever he's a head coach, it's two things. They want to run the ball and they want to play defense. And they're going to be able to run the ball. They got a veteran offensive line, maybe the best tackle in college football in Ariante Ursary, a young, talented running back in Darius Taylor. They'll be able to run the ball. Okay, you're implementing a new quarterback. Okay, but they have got to play better defense. And Joe Rossi joined Jonathan Smith in Michigan State, so they went out and got a new defensive coordinator in Corey Heatherman from Rutgers. At times last year, you know, what made their Minnesota defense so great is they made no mistakes. There was no mental errors. And then in situational football, they rose to the occasion. It was the opposite last year. In the biggest moments, they were out of position. The Illinois game, I think, is a great example of that, just letting Illinois drive down the field and win the game. So you bring in a new coordinator. You're implementing a new language, a new system. They have to take these next 2 weeks and really get their fundamentals in situational football down to a T because you're playing a North Carolina team with talented offense. They got to be on their P's and Q's.
2 weeks is not a lot of time to figure all of the things out that you just touched on, but the Gophers get underway on Thursday, August 29th when they host UNC over on Fox. The preseason Big Ten women's soccer poll has been released with UCLA leading the way over a Penn State team that's been a fixture in the national title race under head coach Erica Dombach. As a sign of the league's strength, 6 of the top 8 teams in the conference poll are also top 25 in the preseason national poll. What a season opener, by the way, for the league's top-ranked team in that national poll, and that's number 4 Penn State. They opened the year at home tonight against number 8 Texas Tech, and you can see it only right here on the Big Ten Network. It's a 7 o'clock Eastern time first kick at Jeffrey Field for the Nittany Lions and the Red Raiders. Meanwhile, some injury news. A big blow to Indiana's offensive line this week. 7th-year player Nick Kidwell is out for the year with a knee injury. The James Madison transfer was expected to start at right guard. Kidwell earned all Sun Belt honors but missed all spring practice recovering from a shoulder surgery, And then in the pro ranks, this was just some devastating news, Jake. J.J. McCarthy's 2024 season over before it really began. The Minnesota Vikings rookie quarterback will be sidelined this season after tearing his meniscus, according to the organization. McCarthy was injured at some point during Saturday's preseason game against the Raiders. He was the number 10 overall pick in the 2024 draft after leading Michigan to a national title. First, as a former Wolverine, what's your reaction to McCarthy's unfortunate injury?
It's devastating. It's the unfortunate part of football. I've torn my ACL and torn my meniscus like 8 times. Like, I've had a ton of knee surgeries, and the good thing is they can fix these things. And I know JJ as a person, he's the type of guy to take an unfortunate situation and use it to his advantage. So they'll get him cleaned up. He will be back. We saw what he's capable of in that preseason game. Looking at his long career, this will be just a minor little thing in the grand scheme of things.
As someone who played soccer, I'm lucky I never had a knee injury, but I saw many teammates and many friends who had to come back And it's just a grueling process of recovery. It really is. Months, even more than a year, some of them it takes. So
right? Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting road ahead for McCarthy. Looking back, though, at college football, in terms of the depth piece early on in the season, you do have injuries pop up. Players are coming back after not taking the summer off, but not maybe playing to this level this often. How important is it to have that next man up mentality?
Well, it's huge. In depth, the difference between the good teams, the great teams, and the championship teams, it really oftentimes is depth. And we talked about Wisconsin's brutal. We've talked about some of the more brutal schedules. That's college football these days. So there's a premium on depth, and injuries have the chance to be the deciding factor in team seasons. So always necessary to develop and recruit and try to build that depth. But in today's college football environment with these schedules, it's even more. It's an even bigger need.
Just 2 weeks away until the show. I cannot wait. The college football season is almost here. Now we're going to run and do a sauna and grab a PSL, right?
Yes, hopefully Chelios will be there too.
All right, well, there you go. For Jake Butt, I'm Kylan Mills. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Maybe.